parties, but on the back of leadership. It's a question of leadership.
Welcome to today's edition of Alan Speaks. My name is Kwame Owusu Danso. Last week, we had a very wonderful conversation relative to the youth policy in the Great Transformational Plan. And I, together with a lot of young people in this country, were able to understand and appreciate the youth policy to be introduced by Honorable Alan Kwadwo Kyerematen when he becomes the President of the Republic of Ghana. Today, we are looking at macroeconomy, the macroeconomic situation in this country. And you do know that if we will be able to implement all the youth policies, then it must be in consonance with how well we manage our economy. And today we have the privilege of sitting again with Honorable Alan Kwadwo Kyerematen to explain to us how he intends to deal with the macroeconomic situation in Ghana. Hello, sir. Welcome again to your own program, Alan Speaks.
Thank you very much, Brian.
So today we are looking at macro economy. And for many of us who are not economists, I'm sure we are confused, as to what macroeconomy is. And so we want you to first of all explain to us what it is, give us a general overview of the Ghanaian situation in respect of the macroeconomic situation.
Thank you very much, and it's good to see you again.
Likewise.
Currently, our economy is in crisis, and it is in crisis because of the failed economic policies of the current government. But it goes beyond that. The economy is in crisis also because of the structural vulnerabilities that have been occasioned over the years by some of the policies that have been adopted by successive governments. So what we find now with our economy cannot only be attributed to the NPP and the way they've handled the economy.
It's perennial.
It goes back many years.
Right.
And it goes back many years because we've not been able to transition our economy into a producing and productive economy. That's what we call structural transformation.
Okay.
Before you can achieve sustained, resilient growth over an extended period of time, you need to have a transformed economy. It's only a transformed economy that will lead to prosperity. And so if Ghana has had to go to the IMF the 17th time, it means that there's something fundamentally wrong with the basic structure of the economy. And unless we deal with the fundamentals, it will seem to us that we are doing well, but we'll always go back, and it will be back and forth. And that is why the GTP has taken the position that if we want to avoid going back to the IMF, then we have to structurally transform our economy. And to do that, there are two levels that have to be addressed.
Right.
One is the macroeconomy.
Okay.
When you talk about the macroeconomy, there are certain indicators that you can use as a metric to establish whether your economy is sound or not. One is inflation.
Right.
The other one is your currency, your debt levels, interest rates. So there are what we call fiscal policies and monetary policies of any economy that would constitute the foundation of what you call the macroeconomy. it is the macroeconomy then that provides direction for the microeconomy.
Right.
So at the microeconomy level, you are getting to the enterprise level. If the macro is sound and robust, the micro would respond.
Right. Beautiful foundation.
Yeah.
And so it gives us an opportunity to now delve into the varied aspects of the macroeconomic indicators that you are framework that you are talking about. I am happy that you've highlighted that we have some structural vulnerabilities, and it is as a result of that. That is why consistently, all the governments we've had have not been able to address the teething challenges that we are confronted with. So let's look at the specifics.
Okay.
And the first thing that comes to mind will be expenditure management. Oftentimes we hear that we borrow money, we generate money internally, but the conversation has been about what we use the money for.
Yes.
And so I am happy that, the policy in itself is telling us how you intend to address the expenditure loophole that we have relative to the macroeconomic situation. So can you explain to us, how you intend to do that? First of all, identifying the problem and also telling us how you intend to do that respectfully.
Very well. The reason why it's always important to start with expenditure management and control is the fact that if you spend more than you earn, then you have to close the gap.
Right.
And you can close the gap often only by borrowing. When you earn income as a country or revenue, that becomes the basis for spending.
Right.
But if you are spending more than the revenue that you have, then you have a budget deficit. And when you have a budget deficit, you have to be able to close that deficit. And often it is through borrowing, as I've said.
Right.
So a prudent management of the economy would require you first to limit your expenditure.
Okay.
And control your expenditure. If you control your expenditure, then you have the basis for being able to have a balanced budget. Obviously, if you have more revenue, it allows you to spend
more.
But then the only way you can spend more is to control your expenditure. If you control your expenditure, then you can spend more. So expenditure management and control is fundamental to any macroeconomy. So the GTP is saying that let us now identify the specific policy interventions that can help us deal with expenditure control and management. And as I indicated in our first chart, the GTP is like the new Bible.
Right.
Economic
Bible.
Now, so you can make reference to specific policy solutions that have been proposed. The first one, if you read, it says, enforce existing legal and regulatory regime on fiscal ceiling to ensure that the budget deficit does not exceed 5% of the GDP.
Right.
So I've talked about how a budget deficit arises.
Right.
When you spend more than you earn, there's a deficit. Now, what the GTP is proposing is that we must comply with the existing legal requirement, which restricts any government from going beyond 5%. That's the budget deficit as a ratio to GDP. That you have to remain within the target threshold of 5%.
Indeed.
And we are proposing under the GTP that under no circumstances should we go beyond this target of 5% the budget deficit. And it's very important. If you have a target, then it is an important trigger for you to determine how much you spend. That imposes a certain constraint on you when you are spending, because you know that if you spend more than is required, then you exceed the legal limit.
Yeah.
So
it means that there's an existing legal framework.
There's an existing legal framework.
The implementation of which
has been undermined.
Okay.
And so, in the current government situation, the government has consistently had to go to Parliament to request Parliament to allow the government to exceed this limit.
Threshold.
So under normal circumstances, it ought not to occur that you go to Parliament to seek approval to exceed this limit. Now, so how do we avoid going to Parliament to seek approval to exceed the limit? That's where the policy prescriptions come in.
Right.
So, and I'd like you, if you have it, you can read it so I can explain
yes,
to you.
Absolutely.
Yes.
So we've to establish a lean but efficient government by reducing the current size of government, including limiting the number of ministerial appointments to not more than 40 ministers.
So what we are stating now is that you want to limit your expenditure as a government. And the GTP says that you have to start from where you have control of the size of your government. How is it that a country of 32 million people, a relatively moderately small country, has over 100 ministers? And that's all a lot of money. If you look at the compensation package for a minister, you can understand the need for reducing the size of your government. Every minister has to be provided with a four-wheel drive Land Cruiser, which is the general trend, and that costs no less than $120,000 US. Yeah. So if you just want to do the basic arithmetic, just to provide Land Cruisers for ministers, if you're talking about 100 ministers, do the arithmetic, and you see how much it involves. Now, a minister is also entitled to a saloon car and also entitled to so many other things. Now, if you consolidate the compensation of not just ministers but other political appointees, no one would need to convince you that if you want to control expenditure and manage your expenditure, that is where you start from. So the first concrete proposal in the GTP is to reduce the number of ministers to 40. And this would be a revolutionary, significant move. And that's what transformation is about. That is what the revolution that we are preaching, that is what it's about.
Yeah, because currently we're looking at monthly salaries of ministers ranging between 30,000 to 33,000.
Yeah,
so if you multiply that by the number of ministers we have, that means that you are, well over your budget.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes. So, and I'm happy that you are looking at reducing the numbers to 40.
Yes, to 40.
But one may want to ask, and this is just a tangential question, but also relevant to. One may want to ask, if we reduce the number of ministers to 40, will the government be able to function?
Yes.
Will your government be able to function?
The argument that every government would try to advance is that you need a certain number of ministers to be able to do the work of government. Yes, that is so. But what you need is an efficient and qualitative government and not the numbers. And if you look at the structure of the 40 ministerial divisions that we are proposing, you can understand why that is completely feasible in terms of undertaking efficiently and effectively the work of government. For example, For a very long time, the case has been made that finance, economic planning, trade and industry are intrinsically related. They go together. If you have a finance minister that does not have an understanding of what industry and trade can bring to the finances of our economy, then there will always be a problem. The Minister of Finance will move one way, industry, trade, that is production and marketing, will be moving another way. And so under this new proposal, under the GTP, we are consolidating finance, trade and industry.
Right.
If you look at the infrastructure requirements of our country, we have telecommunications infrastructure, we have roads, we have rail, we have ports, different infrastructure projects. Now they all can be consolidated. So basically we are looking at infrastructure.
Right.
And so we have now consolidated a number of those infrastructure related ministries into one ministry.
Wow. Okay. So
and then you can have under the minister who then oversees the entire infrastructure regime, having one or two deputies to look at specific
areas.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, and I think it dovetails into rationalizing and consolidating existing government departments, agencies, and other public sector organizations with overlapping mandates.
Very well.
And so what you're saying is that if we're able to streamline the ministries and reduce them to 40, ostensibly we are also looking at streamlining the other departments and parastatals that falls under these ministries.
Exactly.
For the purposes of reducing the numbers, but also ensuring efficiency. That's
exactly what it is. So this second proposal that you just alluded to is that once you consolidate the sector ministries, then by extension you can now also consolidate the agencies and departments under these ministries. Let's take a typical example.
Very well.
Ministry of Energy. Does it make sense that you have so many agencies, institutions under one ministry? You have the Energy Commission, you have the Petroleum Commission, you have NPA, National Petroleum Authority, you have GNPC, you have BOST, you have PURC, all falling over each other. So you can use, you have ECG, you have VRA, you have GridCo, you have NETCO. So immediately, if you just take one example of the energy sector, you can see that these institutions overlap in terms of the execution of their mandate. And can you imagine how much money you can save with this consolidation only in one sector? Only one sector. The amount of money that is saved, not just from compensation, but operational expenses. And one of the entry points for corruption in the public sector is also having all these multiple agencies.
Right.
If it is centralized, obviously
there'll be proper oversight.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that's what the second proposal is speaking to. You reduce the number of sector ministries, and then by extension also you consolidate the departments and agencies under those ministries. By the way, if you read the Constitution, the legal requirement for the number of ministries, that's the cabinet ministers that is required by the Constitution, is 19. And then in addition to that, the Constitution requires any government to appoint a minister in charge of each region. So currently we have 16 regions.
Right.
And so if you add 16 to 19, which is the cabinet ministerial, I would say, appointments, then you have 35. And why would you then go beyond that to as much as 100?
Job for the boys. Perhaps job for the boys.
But that's a cost to the economy.
Put square pegs in round holes.
Yes, that's a cost to the economy.
So you are going to be very prudent.
Because of the effect of expenditure management and control on the entire economy.
Very well. There's also this issue about government's spending and public expenditure, which obviously has an effect on the ratio of public expenditure to gross domestic product.
Yes.
So we are saying that you want to, your target is around 10%. You're not looking at going beyond 10% for a period of 5 years.
Yes.
Can you explain to us, first of all, what you mean by that public expenditure? You're talking about capital expenditure or just normal public expenditure without necessarily it leading to some capital expenditure? Can you explain
basically, it is both.
Okay.
Capital expenditure and non-capital expenditure.
Okay.
So that constitutes public expenditure.
Very well.
And globally, there are standards or benchmarks that are acceptable in respect of an efficient and effective government machinery operation. When you look at global standards, you find that an efficient government would have to have a certain ratio of public expenditure to GDP. So the GTP is in line with global standards, proposing that the ratio of public expenditure to the GDP, which is the size of the economy, must not exceed 10%.
Right.
So that then places a certain limitation on public expenditure if you want to remain within this threshold, just like with the budget deficit.
Right.
Yes. So that's the value of putting this target in the GTP.
Yeah, and that ultimately finds expression in the general macroeconomic.
Yes, the macroeconomic, the health of the macroeconomy.
One of the greatest enemies to our economic well-being as a nation is the issue of ghost names.
Yeah.
And I do know that we lose approximately 2,854,144.80 Ghana cedis annually to ghost names. How do you intend to address this challenge of ghost names?
It looks like you've done your homework. So what happens is that public sector officials that have their salaries paid from the Controller and Accountant General would every year have to be mandated and reviewed for you to be able to collect your salary or to be paid through the Controller and Accountant General's department. But strangely enough, for a very long time, successive governments, you have individuals who have been paid as part of, let's say, the public sector agencies, including the ministries, who physically do not exist.
Right.
And that's what we call ghost names. In some cases, they are actually ghosts because they are deceased. They are deceased. But in some cases also, people who do not work in those institutions find their names on the payrolls of those agencies. And it's been a major source of drain on public finances. And so what the GTP is proposing is that we will reinforce existing mechanisms in payroll and employee compensation management and administration.
Okay.
In many cases, the mechanisms for enforcing payroll management administration, in many cases, those mechanisms are there. It's a question of enforcement. And with the right leadership, if you enforce those existing payroll management and administration mechanisms, you significantly reduce the effect of ghost names. So that's what we are proposing.
Now, it's quite interesting that if you look at the losses that we incur as a nation due to ghost names, we are looking at the causation or the causal factors. We're looking at weak internal, payroll systems. And reading through your plan, I see that you have highlighted that as part of the things that you're going to do, you ensure that you have some strict internal controls and payroll management systems, which is brilliant.
Yes.
Because you've identified that, look, governments have tried, because every time we hear governments say that,
talk about these ghost names.
Exactly. So, I mean, it's commendable that you are saying that you're going to strengthen, these internal payroll systems in order that you'll be able to address these challenges. Also, lack of proper verification and validation of employees. Can you speak a little bit about that?
Yes, because it ought not to be a complicated matter. If you have 10 employees, you have 10 employees. But now you can use artificial intelligence and blockchain technology to trace the causal relationship or the linkages between these individuals, their pay structure, that's pay as you earn, that's their tax commitments, to their national ID, and to so many other things that the individuals are able to do to access public services. So once that integration through digitalization, once that is done, it is much, much easier for you to be able to really get to the bottom of these ghost names. I mean, but Kewode, in matured economies, do you ever hear about ghost names?
I do not.
I mean, so people have an interest in it. People have an interest in it, and the fact that it keeps on occurring means that there's no political will to seriously address the problem. Because look at the numbers that you were quoting.
Absolutely.
If indeed that is affecting your capacity to spend on government projects because you are paying ghost workers, then you have to take this very seriously. And in this modern world, it is the easiest thing to do.
I'm more interested in this because, I mean, government has tried to introduce an electronic payment system to be able to address this, but it appears that it's still a recurring matter. So would you rather perhaps maybe in your implementation of this policy adopt an approach where you are going to prosecute people and make sure that you crack the whip and bring discipline in that space?
Very much so, because it is linked to some other parts of the GTP. When you look at my proposals for public sector reform, the element of deterrence is one, but the element of sanctions is also another. Because people get away with the fact that they can actually supervise the payment to ghost names. Because if you are in charge of a ministry and through the audit system it is found that there were a number of ghost names appearing on your payroll account and nothing happens to you, either to the minister or to the director of finance in that company, in that public sector institution, then obviously they'll find another way of coming back. So it's not just the mechanisms to deter people, but it's also the sanctions associated with this. If you have a situation where there is no sanction regime, and public servants, civil servants, can get away with how they manage the compensation mechanisms of a public agency, then that is serious. It's the sanctions that will impose and that fear in people. If, for example, just for the sake of argument, you had a 30-year jail sentence for any public sector official who is found to be responsible for colluding to have ghost names in a public sector agency. And that deterrence alone and the sanctions is so severe, I have no doubt in my mind that people will start thinking again.
All right. We are still in conversation with Honorable Alan Kyerematen on Alan Speaks. We're going for a quick break. We'll be back shortly. Stay with us. Don't move a muscle.
I say, you be who know me who be away. I say, dear cause of the air, so when I say, you be the place to buy, you may. I say, the ref is a bit jarring. I say, Alan Cash. I say, in this car, is upon wine. I say, and the car labash. I say, that's a blue cannibal. I say, never buy balu. I say, my name in the bride. I say, everything I do. I say, before shine your eye. I say, before you shine you. I say, well, I won't nine it. I say, you want to wear bamboo. I say, hey, I say, I say, Munjai, I say, I say, I dey come like Alan Cash. I say, Alan Cash, plenty money for my bank. I say, for my bank. I say, I say, I say, Munjai, I say, I say, I dey come like Alan Cash. I say.
Welcome back. This is Alan Speaks Primetime Show. My name is Kwame Owusu Danso. Before the break, welcome back. This is Alan Speaks Primetime Show. My name is Kwame Owusu Danso. Before the break, we delved into a lot of the other aspects of the macroeconomic policy in the Great Transformational Plan. One very important, or rather burning question that I have has got to do with procurement. And indeed, you know, we've heard the canker of sole sourcing. We've heard so many other aspects of procurement that we don't, processes that we don't comply with. Now, let us understand your policy direction in respect of dealing with the canker of procurement, because we do know so many issues, you know, that we are bedeviled with, and the amount of monies that we lose to irregular procurement processes.
So just to keep our viewers focused on what we are discussing.
Right.
We are still discussing expenditure management and control.
Very well.
And one of the biggest challenges for government is how much money we lose through government procurement. Now, when government administers the procurement of goods and services, let's say road contract, the process is to invite different companies to bid for a government contract. Now, if in the process of reviewing the proposals from contractors, there's an incidence of manipulation and fraudulent review of the contract management process, then it is a cost to government in the sense that a particular service that can be delivered at $1. If through the type of contracting process that was followed, finally, a $1 contract now is costing government $10. It means government has to pay $10 for a service or set of goods which ordinarily
could have been bought for
$1. So government is spending $9 additional than they ought to. So it's a major source of loss of revenue to government. And because literally in a government that is in control of literally everything, that's where the problem comes from. If the economy that you are running is in the hands of government, then every service, every, I would say, activity is dominated by government providing the funding to have that service provided. Then obviously the contracting for these services becomes a source of interest. And usually sole sourcing makes it even easier for government and the public sector agencies to manipulate the contract management process,
right,
so that they can
benefit from it.
Tied
to this is the issue of conflict of interest.
Yes.
Closely tied to this is the issue of conflict of interest. And recently, I'm sure you may have heard conversations about this SNIT scandal.
Yes. Yeah.
And if you check, you realize that the procurement process had some issues. People raised concerns about the procurement process. Now, what has become a subject matter of controversy is how, when politically exposed people get themselves involved in some of these procurement dealings, nothing happens to them.
Yeah.
In the final analysis, when we are able to identify that they may have gotten the contract by reason of their closeness to power, we just say, oh, it is just by reason of the association. It's not necessarily conflict of interest. What is your definition of conflict of interest? But it is precisely the closeness to power, which is why the contract in itself was not, an open tender, but it was sole sourcing. So how would you balance that when you get the opportunity to rule us? Because it's a major issue. People get contracts. We give contracts to people who do not deserve it.
Yes.
And we use these sole sourcing processes to be able to do that. So how are you going to crack the whip so hard that people will even be afraid to get closer to some of these deals?
So Kwame, we've thought through different entry points for dealing with this problem.
Very well.
And we've come to the conclusion that the most viable and productive way out of this is to put an end to sole sourcing. And that is what this proposal is about.
Right.
It says eliminate sole sourcing in public procurement and contracting to ensure value for money and avoid collusion in the award of contracts. So exactly as you said, if you go through a contract management process and there's no competition, then it is free for all. Whatever they quote, because it's sole sourcing, it will go through. There's supposed to be value for money audit associated with sole source, but almost invariably it doesn't work. So if you want a way out, you cannot depend on the individuals to respond to the I would say the interests of society. This is a moral obligation. They will not, as has been evident, moving from one government to the other. So if that opportunity to sole source is not there, then it is not there. And everybody then has to bid for every project. So this is, in our view, the most productive way of dealing with that.
Right. And it's a brilliant one,
yes,
to be honest. If it is not there, then we'll not even have that conversation.
You can't have that conversation.
One will also be quick to ask with respect if that will also not be problematic, considering that in some areas, you want to explain that, okay, please.
No, I mean, you're right.
Considering that, in some respects, you may want to, engage in sole sourcing for the purpose of expedition.
Yes.
You have a project that you must execute quickly, and that is, or timeously, and that is the only way you can get people to.
I'm happy you are processing it very well.
Right.
Again, I've been in government under 2 administrations.
Very well.
And we've always relied on this logic that in situations where time is of excess, in a situation where the intellectual property rights associated with a particular delivery of service might require you to sole source. We have thought through all that.
Okay.
And it is against that background that one would have expected that it is only in exceptional circumstances that you have to do sole sourcing, as you've rightly pointed out.
Right.
Out of exigency, you have no choice but to do sole sourcing. Unfortunately, people have taken advantage of these so-called exceptional cases. And now, instead of it being exceptional, now it has become the order of the day.
Right.
So, going back to think about it, how else do you deal with this? When every government keeps talking about that we have to deal with sole sourcing, we have to deal with sole sourcing, and make sure we sanitize the public procurement system, and still it is not happening.
Right.
I know NPP was very vehement about the use of sole sourcing by the NDC. Yes. But in the current government and administration, it is obvious that in many cases they have had to resort to sole sourcing. I'll be the first to admit that it is true that in some very specific cases that you may have no choice but to sole source. So what this proposal means is that in the event that it has to be sole source, that decision can only be taken by the president.
Okay.
So because what we are trying to
is to eliminate
the influence of public officials.
Indeed.
Everybody having the capacity to determine whether sole sourcing is appropriate or not.
Indeed.
So once you restrict it in this particular way, literally eliminating it, and if it is indeed based on exigency and it has to be done, it's only the president that can approve of it. Because the buck stops with him.
I think viewers of Alan Speaks primetime show will be happy with the answers you have provided in respect of the sole sourcing matter, because it's a big issue.
It's a big issue. It's a big issue.
So let's proceed and look at the other item under the umbrella area that we are looking at, which is to enforce strict regulations against public sector officials, including those from state, and I'm looking at VII.
Yes.
Including those from state-owned enterprises who commit governments to contractual obligations, including expenditures not budgeted for, and without prior approval from the Ministry of Finance. It does happen?
Yeah, it does happen. And again, just to bring our viewers back to focus, we are discussing expenditure control.
Yes.
So everybody has to work within a budget in the public sector. You prepare a budget, it goes through the process of approval. Once it's approved, then you have the authority to spend based on that approval. But almost invariably, and in many instances, you have public sector officials, including ministers and high-level government officials who commit government to financial contractual obligations that have not been first budgeted for and have not been approved by government. That in itself is against the Public Financial Management Act. It is not allowed, but it is done. So what we are saying is that you have to enforce strict regulations against those who do this. And it is so widespread that if we don't crack the whip, nothing will happen. So this is making sure that under no circumstances can any public sector official commit to spend what has not been budgeted for and approved. This is basic, fundamental requirement in public financial sector management.
I'm sure you have indicated when this issue came up, this issue of the president's daughter providing some service, some ambulance service, and I think some payment was made by the finance minister before he exited. I'm sure that this why you have indicated, you were smiling when you saw it. You see, that's why I put this thing here, so that no payments will be made until it is fully and finally approved and until the work is done. Not so. Yeah, but it appears that these things have been happening, and we are losing so much.
And it's a mark of a discipline.
Right.
See, there's so much indiscipline in our society, and when it extends to financial management and expenditure management and expenditure control, then the cost to government is so significant that we can no longer pay lip service.
You can't reverse these things.
We can't pay lip service to these things.
Right.
So it is a major policy intervention under the GTP.
Very well. Now let's proceed to look at one other aspect of the policy that I really do like, to enhance the management of earmarked statutory funds by eliminating the capping system. And we know what the capping system has done, especially to the common fund. So how do you intend to do that? Are you going to reverse whatever has started under this administration, which obviously has not been able to help, in terms of bringing about proper development and things like that? But most importantly, also in looking at this, what makes me excited is the fact that it's actually also looking at expenditure and how we can manage it.
Yes.
So if one would want to ask that the capping system in itself was to ensure some fiscal discipline.
Yes, very much so.
But if you want to reverse it, then are you not saying that we should spend more now?
That's a very interesting entry point.
Yeah. So you want to explain that?
Yeah, see, there are what we call these statutory funds.
Very well.
Get fund.
Yes.
Road fund.
Yes.
National Health Insurance Fund.
Indeed.
Now, these funds were created under the public sector financial management system to ring fence funds from the consolidated fund for specific activities. So, to a large extent, Get Fund, for example, has been a major vehicle for financing education. If we didn't have Get Fund, and every, I would say, city under the Get Fund was part of the consolidated fund, there is no certainty that there would have been money left in the consolidated fund to finance education. So these statutory funds, in by themselves, are useful to support government projects.
Right.
Now, so when monies are ring-fenced and put into the common fund, to the earmarked funds, one would have expected that we should reserve those funds for the purposes for which they have been created. So I think government, this particular government, the former Minister for Finance, his view was that these monies are being ring-fenced from the consolidated fund. And as Minister for Finance, his hands are tied because when monies are deployed into these funds, what is left in the consolidated fund is basically meager.
Yeah.
And so he has no leverage to be able to do other equally important things. So he brought a suggestion then that we should cap the amount of money that can be ring-fenced, and put into these statutory funds. So that if, for example, the total monies going into these funds was, let's say, 30% of the statutory funds going, or consolidated fund going to statutory funds, then it says, oh, let's cap it. You cannot pay more than, let's say, 20% of consolidated fund into statutory funds. You must cap that, because in his view, the use of the statutory funds themselves were not quite the way it ought to be. That was one of his concerns.
Right.
The second concern too was that we must limit the amount of money that is deployed into these funds. So we should cap the amount of the funds from the consolidated fund that is going into not to exceed a certain amount. Now, what we are saying is that why would we do that? Because if we reverse the existing situation and bring more money into the consolidated fund instead of going into the statutory fund,
there's no need to cap.
Yes,
essentially.
yes, and then also, there's no certainty as to how the monies will be used from the consolidated fund. So it's better they are deployed into the statutory funds because then they are regulated. The use of the statutory funds are regulated. So this proposal just so that to enhance
the management of earmarked or statutory funds by eliminating the capping system.
Yes, the capping system, meaning that once we eliminate the existing capping system, then the statutory funds now become available for what they are intended to achieve, and then we have to be sure that we are using it properly. Otherwise, the finance minister's anxiety would have been proven right. If we are not managing the statutory funds well, then we might as well bring it back into the consolidated fund.
Right.
If people are using statutory funds for purposes other than they were assigned for, then you might as well keep it in the consolidated fund.
Right.
So it is basically a different policy options. We cannot do away with statutory funds, but our view is that we should eliminate the capping system. That suggests that you cannot go beyond a certain percentage of consolidated funds that goes into these statutory funds.
Right. No, well explained. And you want to develop a system to ensure that at least 50% of statutory funds is spent on government priority and transformational projects, and strengthen reporting on the application and use of such funds to avoid misapplication. I like the sustainability plan here. Usually the plan, we are able to hatch the plan well, we implement, but the sustainability of it and to monitor, to ensure the survival of it is usually the problem. And I'm happy that you're saying that, you are going to ensure that at least 50% of statutory funds is spent on government priority and transformational projects.
Yes. I mean, the GTP in the earlier proposal is
Yeah.
making a case for keeping the statutory funds intact.
Yes.
We don't want it to go back into the consolidated fund
yeah.
because we are not sure that it will be used properly. So that was the purpose of
maybe viewers may not appreciate. Some people may not appreciate what consolidated fund is.
Yes,
that
okay.
all the monies that you make
Yes.
are put into a central pool,
in a basket.
and then out of which
Yes.
you take small, you invest here, you take small, you invest
Yes,
here.
yes, yeah.
So that is what it is.
So that's the consolidated
Yes.
fund. Out of the consolidated fund, you ring fence portions of that
Absolutely.
into statutory funds.
Statutory. So those statutory ones created by statute.
By statute.
It's what we are saying that we should protect.
We should protect them because it's created by statute.
For specific
use.
Yes.
We feel that that is more reliable than having a general pool in the consolidated fund and the Minister of Finance has the leverage
to spend as they will.
As they, you know. Now, but if that is the case and we want to protect the integrity and the sanctity of statutory funds, then it imposes a liability on us. That's the GTP saying that then we have to make sure that the statutory funds are being used properly. You cannot eliminate the capping and then
misuse it.
Yeah. So now it's saying that if that is the case and we protect the statutory funds, then it must be spent on government transformational projects. So if, for example, the District Accommodation Assembly Fund is being used to finance activities that have no impact in terms of transformation on the economy, then it means that it is being used recklessly. And once we audit how these statutory funds are being used, then you would realize that some of the funds are being applied for purposes that would have nothing to do with transforming the economy. So it means that they are being misapplied or being misused. But this is saying that government should use the statutory funds, at least 50% of the statutory funds must be applied to transformational projects.
Right.
So if we believe as a government that one district, one factory is a transformational project, if we believe that free SHS is a transformational project, if we believe that
1D, 1F.
Well, yes, all those flagship transformational projects are important, then 50% of these statutory funds in different sectors must be applied to.
Very well. What excites me, and we'll be going for a break shortly, but what excites me is also the fact that you are looking at specific, funding sources, really being used for specific projects.
Yes.
Because you are saying that we should also introduce appropriate policies. Okay, I think you've to ring fence and separate. You've explained that already.
Yes.
Now you're saying that we should apply proceeds from the oil and gas sector, which is the annual budget funding amount, right, to finance only designated government transformational projects. So you are saying that not only should we use the 50% for specific governmental projects, but also other monies that we generate from the annual budget funding amount from oil.
Now you are in position for Minister of Finance.
Must be also used for specific governmental projects.
It's the same thing. The ABFA is almost like a statutory fund in a sense, because monies that we earn from the oil and gas sector are applied or put into these the ABFA. So what this proposal is saying that we must use the ABFA to finance only designated transformational projects. Once you do an audit in terms of the current use of the ABA funds, you realize the value of this proposal, because now it is being used.
We don't even know what it's being used for.
We don't even know what it's being used for.
We don't know.
And that is dangerous, because you are ring fencing funds for purposes of, spending on activities that have no impact on the economy. So this is also saying that apart from the normal statutory funds, which we've discussed, the ABFA, which is also a ring-fenced amount from oil and gas proceeds, must also be used to fund only transformational projects.
Right. Yeah. More like cocoa board, the cocoa money. Is it cocoa board? Yeah, the cocoa roots.
Well,
yeah, more like using the cocoa
yes. For
money.
example, if we determine that cocoa roots are transformational, then we can make a justification. So under no circumstances should
I get it.
ABFA
be limited to maybe specific things.
Yes.
As and when we see that this is transformational, this is a project that is good, then
we can use that too.
That's very brilliant.
Yes, very important.
So we can build schools with it, we can build hospitals with it,
as long as
roads with it.
Those projects
are transformational.
Are deemed to
Two
be
things before the break.
Yes.
Two things before the break. Two things. And if you can respectfully touch on them, I'll be very happy. Okay. Enhance ministerial oversight on capital expenditure in all MDAs to increase transparency in the award of public contracts within sector ministries and public agencies. I think you somehow touched on that.
Because that's unfortunate.
Absolutely,
because,
you touched on that.
I mean, capital expenditure sucks a lot of money.
Absolutely.
And so if there's no ministerial, the emphasis here is ministerial oversight. That ministers must, as in Ghanaian parlance, we say, must shine their eyes and must look into what the civil servants, the people in charge of managing the projects, what they are using, monies that are approved for ministries, what type of capital expenditure projects are they using the funds for. So just ensuring that there's ministerial oversight. If you're a minister and you don't have an interest in these matters, then things may go wrong.
Finally, before the break, to design and apply innovative project financing models such as build, operate, transfer, and PPP, private-public partnership, to finance public infrastructure projects and thereby reduce government capital expenditure. I mean, you served in Kufuor's administration, so it's obvious you have the experience when it comes to PPP. So I don't doubt at all what you can do in that space. But the question that may be lingering on the minds of people is, how do you intend to do that? How would you be able to do that?
In fact, what this proposal is saying that if government is going to use its revenue from taxes and from other sources to finance capital expenditure on infrastructure, then literally there will be no money left to do anything else.
Right.
Just imagine the demands on government in terms of public infrastructure, roads, rail, energy, water. Government does not earn enough to use public funds to finance public expenditure.
Right.
So we have to look for other sources to build roads.
Partnerships.
And that's where the partnership comes in. Now let us invite the private sector to bring in the financing and the capital to finance expenditure on infrastructure which otherwise government would have funded. Why does government want to build all the roads? Why does government want to borrow to construct the railway? Why does government want to borrow to install water systems? You don't have the money, you don't have the expertise in managing them. So why would you want to incur debt to finance infrastructure? Allow the private sector to bring in the capital and expertise and regulate them.
Right.
So it reduces government's expenditure. So can you imagine if government took a policy that from now onwards, unless it is specifically meant for roads that cannot be towed, every other road must be financed by the private sector and towed.
Brilliant idea. Quick break. Stay with us.
for time I got the when I say, you be who know me who be away. I say, yeah, cause of the so when I say, obi the coins to buy me, I say, the ref is a bit dry, I say, Alan Cash, I say, the this car goes up on wine, I say, and the car I say, that's a blue bar, I say, never buy balu, I say, I am in the bride, I say, everything I do, I say, you must shine your eye, I say, before you shine your shoe, I say, well, I won't nine it, I say, you want to wear bamboo, I say, hey, I say, I say, Munjai, I say, I say, I they come like Alan Cash, I say, Alan Cash, plenty money for my bank, I say, for my bank, I say, I say, I say, Munjai, I say, I say, I they come like Alan Cash, I say.
Welcome back. My name is Kwame Owusu Danso. This is Alan Speaks Primetime Show, and we are discussing the macroeconomic policy in the Great Transformational Plan. The next item underneath the umbrella macroeconomic policy is revenue optimization. And indeed, revenue optimization is very key, because all the things that Honorable Alan has decided to do when he gets the opportunity to lead the country will not be able to, he will not be able to do them if he doesn't have the money. And so how will he be able to generate enough internally and externally to be able to execute the projects that he has for the good of Ghana? So revenue optimization, and the first thing that comes to mind is tax.
Yes.
So you're going to generate a lot of revenue internally, and perhaps if it becomes necessary, you may look outside,
yes,
to augment that which you'll be able to generate internally. So how do you, and currently, if you look at how we generate revenue or mobilize revenue, it's through taxes. Nobody likes to pay tax, particularly because we don't see what the monies are used for. So how would you be able to convince people that we should pay tax? That's number one. Number two, how would you be able to also expand or widen the tax net to cover each and everybody, so that you will be able to generate more,
yes,
and then spend it wisely, as you've said in one,
yes,
for the benefit of all Ghanaians?
Yeah. So, Kwame,
Yes, sir.
revenue and expenditure are two sides of the same coin.
Right.
So it makes sense, after talking about expenditure management and control, now to look at revenue. Because if you have more revenue, then you can spend more. Now, so revenue is fundamental to every macroeconomy. But it's a very difficult area to manage, for the simple reason that if you want to extend your sources of revenue optimization or revenue mobilization, then, as you rightly pointed out, generally speaking, it's through taxes. Now, but an enhanced tax regime is also not the right regime to support productive investments in any economy. Any economy that has a high tax regime cannot attract investments.
True.
And so it is a chicken and egg situation. You can only earn revenue, or not only, primarily earn revenue through taxes. The more taxes you impose, you are not making your companies competitive. So you need to have a balance. And that is why you have to expand what we call the tax net. So it's not a question of increasing the nominal taxes or the number of taxes. You can raise the same amount of revenue from taxes if more people are paying tax than is currently the situation. Now, we know that currently only a few people who are designated within the tax bracket in the formal sector actually contribute to tax revenue. But if that is the case, then it is a burden on those who are paying taxes. So only a few people are paying taxes. But the argument we are making here is that if you expand the tax net to include what we've described as other economic actors, then you can have the same level of tax or even reduce the level of taxes, but have many more people who are paying. We know there are many professionals, including accountants, lawyers, doctors in private practice, who do not have a good record of tax payment.
Right.
You have Ghana is essentially an informal economic regime. There are many people in the informal sector who are not caught in this tax net. And once you're unable to bring all these economic actors into the tax net, then it will mean that only a few people will have to pay taxes. And that's why the proposal is that don't increase taxes to optimize your revenue. Rather, expand the tax net, bring more economic operators into the tax net, and then you would end up having more revenue. So this is the first proposal, is that don't automatically increase taxes just to be able to earn more revenue, which is the easiest thing for government to do. And they keep on doing that. As soon as it's about revenue mobilization, let's impose this tax. But when you do that, then you are creating a problem for the businesses who are the only ones paying tax. Expand the tax net, and then more people will be caught in the tax bracket. So that's the proposal.
Yeah. One of the important places that I think we can, or as a nation, we can generate a lot of revenue from is the ports.
Yes.
Now, annually, we lose close to $230 million annually from the ports. And we're looking at under invoicing and some other surreptitious processes that the people, go through in order that they can steal from the state. One of the things, and I'll say this on this program, that one of the reasons why I liked Ken Ofori-Atta in the beginning was his identification of the loophole that there exists at the port. And he stated that, when he was before the appointments committee. And he indicated that, at the time, he was going to ensure that we plug the loopholes and digitalize the place so that we'll be able to, generate enough to augment that which we generate from the other sectors, right? So we lose about 230 million. Fast forward, we know that he was unable to do that.
Yes.
So how do we ensure that we plug the loophole so that we'll be able to, at the very least, get $230 million annually from just the ports to support, the small that our brothers and sisters in the other sectors will be paid, the artisans and things like that. How would you be able to do that? I've seen that you want to introduce AI, blockchain and all of that. So explain further.
It's very important. As you said, a lot of revenue is lost from port operations.
230 million is significant.
Now, but the key is to make sure that you have the right system, management system, the right customs management and administrative system that allows you to block the leakages.
Right.
For many years, government after government has been complaining about the leakages in terms of revenue from the ports, but they're unable to block these leakages. When I became Minister for Trade and Industry under President Akufo-Addo,
right,
the first major project that I decided to focus on was how to maximize our revenue from the ports, but by extension also improve our trade facilitation agenda. The two go together. if you have an efficient trade facilitation mechanism, then you would improve your revenue generation. And so I introduced a new system called the UNIPAS, which is a South Korean trade facilitation and customs management system. Now, I'm sure you recall that there was a lot of backlash and a lot of negative comments that were made at that time against what I was trying to do, that I was bringing in a new system. I had signed off the existing ones and brought in a new system. The customs guys were complaining, freight forwarders were complaining, importers were complaining, but I stood my ground because, as you rightly pointed out, successive governments have not been able to block these leakages. But it's a question of, as I said, the technology that you are using. And the system that I introduced, in spite of all the negative propaganda, has been the biggest blessing to our country. I should be boasting about it.
Absolutely.
It's been the biggest blessing because can you imagine that this was introduced in 2020 in the midst of the COVID, which then was basically a very difficult time. No production, no imports, literally no economic activity. So it's a very difficult time to introduce it. Now, can you imagine, and just because of the limitation on time, 2019, if you look at the port revenue figures,
Right.
2019, when the economy was at its peak, full production, full everything, we made 13.6 million Ghana cedis. 13.6 million Ghana cedis. And I introduced this new system around June 2020 in the midst of Congress. In the first 3 months after the introduction, we were able to earn 3 billion cedis more. First 3 months, just by changing the system, we earned 3 billion cedis more than the previous quarter. So then the matter speaks for itself as lawyers.
Yes.
You know, the matter speaks for itself. It means that the system was allowing leakages, which was reducing our revenue inflows. Now, as we speak now, look at the statistics. 2023, revenue from port operations has increased to over 30 billion. So from 13 billion to almost 32 billion in 2023. So the evidence is very clear. Just by changing the port management system.
You have the expertise because you've done it.
Yes.
You've done it. Right.
Because
I know that the issue of lack of compliance, you know, was one of the reasons why we're losing such huge sums. Yes. And you've been, wow.
So the lack of compliance is associated with the type of system.
Right.
Because if you have the right system, the right risk engine,
automatically you are cutting. I see that.
But it's very significant.
Indeed.
The numbers point to that. Yes.
Indeed. You know, the point 3 talks about conducting a comprehensive financial and technical audit of port operations to identify and block revenue leakages, including but not limited to mechanisms to address trade misinvoicing and transfer pricing. I think we've explained that.
We've explained that.
But you see, do you know why I like your policy, right? Your policy, even though identifies the problem, tells you what it is going to do.
Yes.
You know, in highlighting the problem.
Yes.
And also finding
the
solutions.
Yes.
Do you understand?
I'm happy you've pointed because
this
is a solution oriented.
Yes. And I'm very happy about it. And beyond that, you are saying that you will conduct a comprehensive review of the management and operations of the Ghana Revenue Authority, with a view to enhancing the efficiency and effectiveness of tax administration and revenue mobilization.
Yes. So apart from the new customs management system and trade facilitation system that I introduced, which has given us so much more additional revenue, we need to look also at the institutional structure of our revenue collection agencies, because that is basically also part of the problem. And it's not just a question of introducing a new system. Those who are managing the system must also be looked at, and we can do even more or better in terms of revenue mobilization if we restructure GRA and the VAT administration and other revenue. So that's what this is speaking to.
Right. And then you also want to enhance the collection of rent tax.
You seem to be in trouble.
Okay, no, before that, you want to review the application of the existing windfall tax regime as a vehicle for revenue. I think you've explained that already.
Yes.
This issue about rent tax, property tax rate, capital gains tax, investment income tax, and sin taxes. I remember the first time I heard sin tax, I started laughing. I said, is it when you go and buy condom? And then like, I now go and started laughing at me. Kwame, that's not sin tax. Yeah. You know, but rent tax, property tax, these are taxes that we know of, but these are taxes that are paid, in the more advanced countries. In Ghana, Kwame, you have managed to build your 2-bedroom house. And you struggled, actually. The country didn't provide any means for you to build. And you've managed to build your 2-bedroom house. And then Honorable Alan says, Charlie, you have to pay property tax. And all of that. And then the rent tax, you see. The young people after university, we are struggling small, you know. And obviously, you have provided a solution in our previous conversation. But don't you think when you bring this rent tax, we will struggle more? Or you would find a way around it, as you always have.
In fact, we have no choice.
Right.
Because let's try and help our viewers also focus on what we are discussing.
Indeed.
We are talking about revenue optimization. And we are saying that we want to have a low tax regime at the same time.
Okay, all right, I get it.
It may seem contradictory. You want to have a low tax regime,
but also increase your revenue.
You also want to increase your revenue. So it means that you must look at taxes which are important and which can be validated in terms of its importance and contribution to tax revenue, and make sure that you collect those ones, rather than increasing taxes which would affect productivity of the private sector, because there's a basket of taxes that you can impose. Some of them will reduce the competitiveness of businesses, and once that happens, it will not help the economy. Because they will have to reduce their production or even go out of businesses. But there are other taxes which you can collect which does not affect the economy in any way negatively, but rather increases your revenue. One of them is rent tax. You know, the concept of tax is that if you earn income, you must pay tax.
Absolutely.
So if you rent your property to an individual and they pay you rent, that is income to you as a landlord. You are supposed to pay
tax on that.
But how many landlords pay rent tax?
That's what I'm saying. They will offload it on the poor gentleman who has come to rent their property. Well, they will find a way of offloading that.
That's a good point.
Unfortunately.
That's a good point.
Unfortunately.
That's a good point. But you know, there's also what you call price elasticity. There's a point to which you cannot continue raising, let's say, your rent, because then there'll be no demand for your property. So within a reasonable limit, you can increase your rent. However, when you earn income from the rent that is paid to you, just like everybody else, you should pay tax.
Income tax, yeah.
How do you expect government to finance public infrastructure when you earn money, you earn income, you are not paying tax? So all that this is saying is that instead of imposing taxes on the private sector, on those who are doing business, which makes them uncompetitive, make sure that you collect taxes on income from rent. And also, property tax. It's true, like you're saying, you're a young man, you've managed to build your house, and you're supposed to pay taxes. But indeed, the target is not really those who you are describing.
Right.
The target is the real estate, big companies, and then also individuals who have mansions and they have big properties and they've never paid taxes on it. So that is part of the problem.
I see capital gains tax here.
Yes.
I mean, sale of assets.
It's the same thing.
Okay.
When it's, you see, when you transfer property, you sell any
like maybe stocks, shares,
yes, all those things,
collectibles, and
yes,
those ones.
absolutely. And that's also income coming to you,
right,
from trading in those stocks or whatever. So why do you want somebody else to pay tax, and you don't want to pay tax on what you call capital gains tax? Yes. So that's basically those ones. Government has every right to enforce revenue collection and tax collection from these sources.
I mean, as part of revenue mobilization or revenue optimization, you are looking at restructuring the road toll system.
Yes.
And, so that we can generate more. I've often queried why we do not use the road tolls to benefit other sectors. I do know that, yes, we are supposed to use it to fix the roads and things like that. But there are some other areas that we can use the road tolls to sort out. And I say this because I used to live in Teba.
Okay.
And I know the number of times I personally paid toll.
Your one city.
Or that. Oh, I mean, but I lived in Tema for so many years and I could count the number of times I used that. So if in a day I shuffled between Accra and Tema 5 times, that's 5 cities.
Yes,
and that's me alone.
Yeah, I understand.
I'm saying there are several other people, big cars and things like that. And at the last check, I don't really recall, but at the last check, I was told that daily, just on the Tema Accra motor, we were making around, is it 100 and something thousand cities a day?
Okay.
Just on the
yes. On the
I mean, and how many times do we have potholes on our roads?
Yes.
So those monies, how do we account for those monies? What do we use those monies for, really? Because if we are using it to fix just the Tema, we are saying that we are using it to fix just the Tema Accra motorway.
Yes.
We have got to borrow money to come and to complete, the Accra Tema motorway.
Yes.
And so those monies that we generated prior to the cancellation of those routes, what did we use it for? So you are saying that you want to relook at it and perhaps, make sure that we generate more and then use it to even fix some other feeder roads and things like that will obviously bring about some development to the country.
But the interesting slant to this, though, is that we have to understand that unless we charge what I will call decent rates in terms of road tolls, it is not possible for government either to maintain the roads or to apply it to other areas that you are proposing. The proposal even makes it more compelling that we should, because that's exactly what this is talking about.
Yes.
So it is something that we need to consider seriously if we want to use it for road maintenance, and also, as you've suggested, apply it to other uses.
Yes.
We have to enhance the collection of road tolls, and expand the application across various road networks,
which is essentially what I'm talking about.
What you're talking about.
Yes.
So, for example,
because I would be happy.
Feeder roads, yes.
Honorable, I'll be happy.
It's almost like you are paying more to go on the motorway, so that we can fix the roads in the villages, and then be able to cut foodstuffs.
Brilliant.
Into the markets, and it would reduce the cost of transportation for foodstuffs, and then will reduce food prices and food inflation. Yes.
So you see, you solved my problem for me. You have solved my problem for me. You have solved my problem for me. You see, you understand the problem. Right.
Makes a lot of sense.
Absolutely. And then this luxury taxes.
I'm sure you're against it. Because you drink champagne.
I don't have a luxury vehicle yet.
Yes, okay.
Hopefully I get one soon. And so that I'll pay, because I want to pay. But I need a luxury vehicle, and then I'll be able to pay. Maybe LX 570. I like that vehicle. Anyway, but it is something that obviously, once we are able to introduce and sustain, will generate some more revenue to augment the others that will.
Yes.
So obviously, I think it's quite
speaking to the fact that we want to increase taxes, but we want to increase taxes that will not affect the economy in terms of private sector competitiveness. But clearly, if you increase taxes on luxury items, then in a sense one would say that it's affecting individuals who have money and they can pay, they can afford it. That will not affect the efficiency of production, which then will be negative.
Right.
So these are areas where you can increase taxes and rather reduce taxes on other areas.
Which is brilliant. I like this thing about Freeport Enclave. And in Togo, they have free ports. I know a lot of Ghanaians ship their vehicles through Togo, and then they clear it, and then they pay something small, and then, and I like the fact that you want to introduce that in Ghana. Have you looked at the negative effects of it, and the positives, to see whether or not the introduction of it will, even though will bring about some revenue optimization, but also would not come and affect, this issue of dumping, the dumping system, where everybody will seize the opportunity to come and dump anything in Ghana. Have you looked at?
It's a very interesting comment, in the sense that there seems to be some confusion in people's minds about talking about a free port, and at the same using that as a means of mobilizing more revenue.
Right.
Now the explanation is that when you have a free port, essentially you are attracting a lot of vessels into your port. A free port essentially is a transshipment port. A free port is essentially a transshipment port. So vessels come into the free port because no taxes are paid, particularly when you are transshipping the goods to other destinations.
Right.
And that is why, if you take Singapore, Hong Kong, Shanghai, all those free ports, Dubai, are very important vehicles for economic development, because a lot of ships and vessels consolidate their cargo there before they are transshipped into other destinations. So the money that you earn from shipping services due to increased vessel traffic is what would increase revenue mobilization. So it's not contradictory. If you want to offload goods from a free port into your customs territory, into the country, then you have to pay duty.
Very well.
If you want to offload the goods into your country, then you have to pay.
Okay.
But the reason why Togo then becomes attractive is that because it's a free port, a lot of vessels go into the Togo port for transshipment. But let's be careful. Some of the goods that are brought in from Togo are smuggled into the country.
Indeed, that's why I was looking at the other effects of it.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. But because you're going to have a tight legal regime.
Absolutely. For a free port.
Some of these.
Yes, because once you offload the goods in a free port into the economy, then it's no longer coming into a free port. It's coming into an economy for which there are duties to be paid.
Which means you have to pay.
You have to pay.
Quick break. Stay with us. We'll be back shortly.
I say, you be who know me who be away. I say, here goes the air, so when I say, be the coins to buy, baby, I say, the ref is a bit dry, I say, Alan Cash, I say, the this car calls upon wine, I say, and the car labash, I say, that's a blue caliber, I say, never buy balu, I say, my hand in the bride, I say, everything I do, I say, before shine your eye, I say, before you shine your shoe, I say, go I want 9 years, I say, you want to work on boo, I say, hey, I say, I say, Munjai, I say, I say, I dey come like Alan Cash, Alan Cash, plenty money for my bank, for my bank, I say, I say, I say, Munjai, I say, I dey come like Alan Cash, I say.
Alan Speaks Primetime Show with me, Kwame Owusu Danso. Welcome back. Now, we are going to be dealing with another arm of the macroeconomic policy that we've been discussing. The first one that we dealt with, we looked at management of expenditure management and control. Then we looked at revenue optimization. Now we're coming to look at lower taxes and duties. Makes me happy. We're going to lower taxes and the payment of duties, because if you are in Abusokai, I'm sure you are right now, you are reeling from the increment in taxes, especially at the ports. And I'm excited that Honorable Alan John Kwadwo has captured this quite forcefully in his plan. Now, on this occasion, respectfully, I just want to allow you take us through, what you mean by lower taxes and duties. I don't want to interrupt you. I just want to allow you to explain to the viewers very quickly.
Very well. I mean, lower taxes are critical for every economy, and it's one of the most important macroeconomic indicators. In Ghana, our tax regime is very high, and it makes our economy unattractive for investments. So what the GTP is saying is that our target is to become the lowest tax regime in ECOWAS,
right,
to attract more investments. So how are we going to do this? It means that we have to abolish a number of taxes. Number one, we are proposing that we abolish what is called the special import levy of 2%. We would also abolish the COVID-19 health recovery level. For Christ's sake, COVID has been over for how many years now? What is the basis for charging the COVID-19 health levy? So that will be abolished.
The explanation was that, respectfully, was that we are still paying some COVID vaccines that we were given. You know, I remember the last time that was the explanation I was given. I don't know whether it is true or not. But
yes, but
yeah,
we have to be careful that we are not passing on certain inefficiencies within the management architecture of this COVID pandemic onto consumers or onto taxpayers. Yes, you may still be paying for vaccines and so on and so forth, but to a large extent, there is no relevance for this in our current administration, looking at how long we've had to deal with it. There are other sources of, I would say, income that you must use to deal with whatever additional expenses you have to cover from COVID. It doesn't have to be a COVID levy. So at what point are you going to
stop? Yeah.
You can always use that as a justification.
It's like ESLA.
It's like ESLA. But even in ESLA, you can understand that we made certain commitments to some independent power producers.
Okay.
And those are contractual obligations. You cannot avoid that.
But I'm saying it's like ESLA by reason of what government said. I mean, this administration said what you know.
No, you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
So we would have to abolish that. Then we have to abolish what is called the health service disinfection fee. Again, for Christ's sake, what are we disinfecting?
Flies.
I like that. Yeah, I believe so that will also be abolished. Then also, the cost of spare parts is a major contributory factor to the cost of transportation.
Indeed.
And so if we reduce the costs associated with bringing in spare parts, we can also reduce the cost of transportation. So here, the proposal is to abolish all taxes and other charges on the importation of spare parts. But we say within 2 years of the establishment of the government of national unity, that's if Alan becomes president. We are saying within 2 years because you also don't want to undermine the current revenue mobilization regime by doing it instantly, let's say, on coming into it. But within a period of 2 years, you would have been able to sanitize the environment to be able to block leakages and earn more revenue from other sources, including what we've already discussed.
Indeed.
So that the continuing imposition of duties and charges on spare parts will not be necessary. That's why we've given ourselves a period of 2 years to deal with that.
Right.
And we also are talking about reviewing and consolidating all statutory fees and charges on imports imposed by regulatory agencies. When you import goods into Ghana, you have to pay Standards Authority, you have to pay a fee, Food and Drugs Authority where it is required. You have to pay so many other agencies, regulatory fees, EPA. Now, although it is important that we pay fees for services that are rendered by these agencies, the proposal being made is that we have to consolidate them. If we consolidate them, it will be an easier burden on importers, so that you don't have to be running around to all these agencies to pay these regulatory fees. But even more importantly, if we consolidate them and have a basket of fees that you have to pay to regulatory agencies, maybe you can reduce the consolidated amount and then somehow still be able to have the services from these agencies. Another major proposal that the GTP makes in reducing the effect of taxes on Ghanaians is to change the mode of calculating the levies and then what we call the VAT and then other charges. Currently, we have a VAT regime of 12.5%.
Yes.
In the previous dispensation, the 12.5% VAT rate is consolidated with the NHIA levy, which is 2.5%, and then get fund levy, which is another 2.5%. So together, you have 5% plus 12.5%.
That's about 17.5.
That's 79.5. So if you rendered a service for purposes of calculating VAT and the levies, they would apply 17.5% on the value of that service. So if it was 100 cedis, then they will apply 17.5. Now the Ministry of Finance introduced this new current regime where first they apply 12.5% VAT to the service, 200 cedis. Then they apply NHIA 2.5 on the 12.5 on the service, and then after that get the total, and then come and calculate another 2.5 get fund on the total of the VAT plus the NHIA, and then another 2.5, which is a compounded calculation instead of having a consolidated figure of 17.5, which is applied directly. But if you apply VAT, then you apply a levy on VAT. It actually means that you are applying a levy on the VAT, and then you apply another levy on the VAT plus another levy plus another levy. So this is actually killing our companies and individuals. And so it's a major recommendation that will eliminate the compounded calculation of VAT and levies in the economy.
All right. Not too soon, we've come to the end of part 1 of this conversation. Next week, we'll be bringing you part 2 of the macroeconomic conversation on Alan Speaks. My name is Kwame Owusu Danso. Thank you for watching today's edition. We'll be back next week. Stay with us.
Truly African.